Introduction: The Neon Cavern. Humanity is not agonizing from a lack of light, it is agonizing from an overdose of artificial radiance. Throughout the centuries, we have tragically confused enlightenment with dazzlement. From the instant we open our eyes in this era, we are bombarded by a spectrum of synthetic frequencies, the incessant flash of screens. We are bombarded by the hollow glow of external approval and the flickering urgency of a world that demands our perpetual attention. To this optical prison, to this ecosystem of empty stimuli that saturates our retinas and deafens our intuition, we shall call it the Neon Cavern. Within this cavern dwell the sleepwalkers. They walk hypnotized by colored lights that emit no heat, chasing reflections in puddles of stagnant water. The sleepwalker believes that if he accumulates enough external flashes, the applause of the crowd, social recognition, conditioned affection, he will manage to dissipate the deep darkness he feels in his core. He lives terrified of visual silence. For him, turning off the background noise is equivalent to annihilation. Therefore, he consumes borrowed light. He begs for the radiance of others. He becomes a slave mirror, obsessively reflecting the expectations of an environment that, in reality, is just as blind as he is. But neon light is sterile. It does not make seeds germinate. It only masks decay. The tragedy of the sleepwalker is vibrational fatigue. By attempting to tune into thousands of dissonant frequencies at the same time, his own internal signal is distorted until it becomes inaudible. His mind becomes a splintered glass. It refracts reality into spectrums of anxiety, fear, and continuous exhaustion. The sleepwalker lives in a state of permanent light malnutrition because the glare he absorbs lacks the wavelength necessary to touch his spirit. He has forgotten that he was not designed to stare at floodlights, but to perceive subtle nuances. He was designed to perceive the depth of shadows and the harmonic immensity of open space. The awakening from this hypnosis begins with an act of serene rebellion, the voluntary closing of the eyes in the face of stridency. Whoever dares to turn their back on the neon cavern and dive into the twilight of their own consciousness, whoever dives into their own consciousness takes the first step to transmute into a luminary. The Awakened Prism understands an unnegotiable metaphysical truth. Genuine light is not a lighthouse you must find on the horizon to guide you. Light is a primordial frequency that emanates from your own center when you silence the world. This work is a tuning fork to sharpen your perception, a journey to unlearn the addiction to false brightness and remember the sacred language of resonance. Here you will not find the friction of war, but the pure alchemy of vision. We will teach you to clean your internal crystal, to stop begging for reflections. We will teach you to stop begging for reflections and to ignite the inexhaustible emanation of your own essence. Chapter 1: The Distorted Prism and False Refraction. In the vast and silent theater of existence, humanity's deepest tragedy is not its ignorance, but its perceptive arrogance. From the first spark of consciousness in the neon cavern, the sleepwalker has been taught to blindly trust the projector of his own mind. He has been inoculated with a dogmatic and deeply erroneous belief. He believes that the reality his senses perceive and his emotions process is the absolute, objective, and unalterable truth of the universe. The ordinary individual walks through the world convinced that he is an impartial observer, a perfect camera simply recording what is out there. This is the illusion of absolute truth. Observe the optical X-ray of the sleepwalker in his daily life. When this individual opens his eyes and contemplates his life, he believes he is seeing facts. If someone does not return a call, he perceives rejection. If a commercial project fails, he perceives an unjust tragedy. He feels the world is designed to hurt him. The sleepwalker suffers, enrages, and panics, consuming his vital energy defending himself against a reality that he claims is out to get him. He lives immersed in an optical hallucination of abysmal proportions. He believes that the dark and threatening colors staining his existence belong to the objects and people around him. The sleepwalker points an accusing finger at the outside world, demanding that the universe change its tone so he can find peace. He demands that his partner be different, that the economy be kinder, and that circumstances shine with the specific light his ego demands. He ignores the most elementary principle of light and perception. The external universe possesses no narrative. Life events, a bankruptcy, a goodbye, a silence, a critique, are in their essence pure white light, neutral photons devoid of dramatic meaning. Color is not in the light itself, but in the way that light is decomposed when passing through a medium. His pain is a projection. By believing his perception is the truth, the sleepwalker condemns himself to live as a slave to his own optical illusions. He is a prisoner who has painted monsters on the lenses of his glasses and now screams in terror, convinced the forest is full of demons. He exhausts himself fighting against shadow puppets. He desperately tries to modify the cinema screen, never suspecting that the distortion and the origin of his agony reside exclusively in the splintered lens of his own internal projector. As long as the sleepwalker continues to worship his own mirage, as if it were a natural law, he will remain chained to dissonance. The dynamics, the anatomy of the splintered crystal. To dismantle the blasphemy of ordinary perception and awaken to the unshakable clarity of the luminary, we must abandon the surface of emotions and descend into the engine room of consciousness. We must study the optical phenomenon that transforms the peace of the universe into the hell of the individual, false refraction. In pure optics, when a beam of perfect white light travels through a vacuum, it remains whole. However, when that light penetrates a denser material medium, such as a glass prism, it undergoes a change in speed. This change forces the light to curve or bend, a phenomenon known as refraction. This reveals the rainbow. Depending on the density of the crystal, white light breaks down into a range of different frequencies. If the crystal is geometrically perfect and pure, the refraction is beautiful and predictable. But the mind of the modern human is not a crystal of geometric purity, it is a block of deeply contaminated glass. Since birth, you have been subjected to a bombardment of conditioning. Every time your parents passed on their economic fears, they inscribed a microscopic fissure in your prism. Every time the educational system punished you for stepping out of the mold, it deposited a layer of soot on your lens. You became a broken crystal. Your mind became full of impurities, opaque cracks, and asymmetric densities. This is where the tragedy of false refraction is triggered. An event occurs in the outside world. Suppose your partner decides to end the relationship. In the pure vacuum of existence, this event is simply a movement of energy. It is a biological entity that has altered its spatial and emotional trajectory. It is a photon of white light, neutral and silent. It carries no load of evil, injustice, or tragedy. It simply is. But that beam of white light enters through your senses and violently hits your mental prism. The light tries to navigate this labyrinth of broken glass. It encounters the fissure of childhood abandonment, the stain of physical insecurity, and the cracks of the fear of loneliness. The light refracts chaotically. It scatters, it distorts. What entered as a neutral event, white light, comes out the other side projected. It comes out as a boiling red of resentment, a deep violet of depression, and a dense grey of existential panic. The sleepwalker's mind experiences this burst of chaotic colors and, due to his illusion of absolute truth, concludes that the event itself was red, violet, and grey. He believes the departure is a tragedy. He blames the light for the ugliness of the colors, completely ignoring that the light was pure before hitting his own internal rot. This is false refraction. It is the mechanism by which the human ego hijacks neutral reality and tints it with the poison of its own unresolved history. This is the root of reactivity. Two people can witness the exact same event, losing a job, for example, and while one refracts it as a final humiliation pushing him to suicide, the other refracts it through a cleaner prism and perceives it as the liberation needed to found his own empire. The light was the same. The difference was the crystal. As long as you live in ignorance of your own optical mechanism, you will be a perpetual victim of circumstances. You will keep spending energy trying to clean the shadows projected on the wall of your life, instead of turning around to polish the crystal projecting them. Every unhealed wound acts as a lethal index. Every repressed fear bends the light of your present to force it to repeat the nightmares of your past. To master the language of light, the first step is to accept, with a cold and ruthless humility, that almost nothing that makes you suffer is real. Everything is the product of your own poor geometry. The synthesis, the alchemy of the awakened prism. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary marks the end of perceptual victimhood and the birth of optical sovereignty. For the awakened prism, complaining is a low vibration frequency, a static noise emitted by broken crystals as they are traversed by life. The luminary refuses to ask the universe to dim. He understands that his only and sacred responsibility in this existence is the absolute maintenance and purification of his own internal structure. Alchemy does not consist of changing the light, it consists of cleaning the medium. The synthesis of this chapter is materialized through the practice of neutral observation. Awakening begins when you decide to become the silent auditor of your own refractions. The luminary abandons the cavern of impulsive reactions. When an intense ray of light hits his life, a commercial betrayal or a financial loss, the luminary stops time. He feels the white light enter his mind. He feels the biological impulse of his ego wanting to refract it toward anger or panic. And in that millisecond of vibrational suspension, he intervenes, he detaches from the emotion. He observes the anger being born, but he does not identify with it. He says, "This is simply light. This rage is not reality." He realizes the photon is being bent by old fissures. By executing this surgical separation between the external event and the internal reaction, the luminary stops the distortion. He takes the authority away from the shadow. But the awakened prism does not stop at mere observation. He executes purification. He begins to polish the faces of his consciousness. To achieve perfect translucency, you must face every stain of soot darkening your vision. You must question every belief the system has implanted. Why does failure generate shame? That shame is a tar stain left by an educational system designed for docility. Clean it. Why does the rejection of others diminish your value? That pain is a crack inflicted by the biological need to belong to the tribe. Fill it with the resin of your own validation. Polishing the crystal is painful. It demands you stop blaming your exes or the economy for your life's ugly colors. It demands you assume absolute responsibility over every photon of experience you process. But as you sand down the attachments and heal the wounds, the density of your mind begins to lighten. Your crystal becomes purer. The faces of your intellect align with a sacred geometry. Then the miracle occurs. When you reach the state of the awakened prism, your mind acquires a quality similar to that of an immaculate diamond. When the universe throws its events at you, whether blessings or storms of apparent destruction, the light enters your consciousness and does not distort. You see things exactly as they are. Since you no longer have fears to bend the light, the event passes through you with astounding clarity. You see betrayal not as drama, but as a simple mathematical reconfiguration of alliances. You see success not as an excuse for arrogance, but as a simple increase in wave amplitude. You see the truth. The 3D world does not know how to deal with a luminary. Sleepwalkers try to project their fears onto you. They try to provoke you, expecting your crystal to return a flash of anger. They expect you to resonate with their noise. But their attacks simply pass through your transparency without leaving a mark. You find no internal resistance, and therefore you suffer no wear. You are inoffendable, unmovable, and lethally clear. Perceptive sovereignty is the first pillar of vibrational mastery. While your lens is dirty, even the most divine light will become a monster. Stop asking the world to treat you softly. Demand from yourself the iron discipline of cleaning your own optical machinery. Convert your consciousness into an immaculate window, a medium of propagation so perfect and transparent that, in the end, the difference between the pure light of the universe and your own essence becomes gloriously imperceptible. Chapter 2. Resonance and the End of Background Noise. In the vast and subtle ocean of invisible frequencies, contemporary humanity has developed one of the saddest and most exhausting vibrational pathologies in its history, the illusion of attraction through the force of desire. To the inhabitant of the neon cavern, This sleepwalker who trips over the shadows of his own lacks, a spiritual dogma of mass consumption has been sold. He has been convinced that the universe is a kind of cosmic catalogue, a deaf and distant entity that must be begged, screamed at, and demanded of to obtain a result. He has been indoctrinated in the false premise that if he yearns for something with enough strength, if he visualizes it to the point of exhaustion, reality will eventually bend to his whim. Observe the acoustic X-ray of this daily tragedy. The sleepwalker lives in a state of perpetual lack. He feels a piercing void at his core and, desperate to fill it, steps out onto the balcony of his consciousness to scream at the cosmos. He demands prosperity, demands love, demands peace of mind, and demands recognition. Sweaty, exhausted, and frustrated, the ordinary individual invests an immense amount of emotional energy trying to attract his yearnings. He builds vision boards, recites positive affirmations with clenched teeth, and mentally struggles with his environment, attempting to drag three-dimensional reality toward his lap. But the universe does not respond. The silence he receives in return is deafening, and the circumstances of his life hardly change, or worse yet, they become more chaotic. The sleepwalker collapses, feeling abandoned by the divine, believing he is not worthy, or that he did not desire with enough faith. He ignores with a perceptive innocence that proves lethal that the very act of desperately desiring is the acoustic barrier that prevents him from receiving. The universe does not understand the human language of necessity. It does not comprehend words, nor tears of frustration, nor mournful pleas. The architecture of existence is not a moral judge that rewards effort or punishes laziness. Reality is, in its purest and most abstract form, a perfect acoustic mirror, an infinite tuning fork that only knows how to do one thing: resonate with the signal that is sent to it. And here lies the deadly trap of desperate desire. When you desire something with urgency, the fundamental frequency you are emitting is not that of what you yearn for, but the frequency of the lack of that which you yearn for. When the sleepwalker screams, "I want abundance," the hidden, deep, and true vibration emanating from his core is, "I am miserable, and I have nothing." When he pleads, "I want love," the wavelength he is actually radiating is the piercing cold of loneliness and the terror of abandonment. The sleepwalker believes he is emitting a bright light of hope, but in the vibrational spectrum, he is radiating a dense, dark, and heavy fog of insufficiency. This is the great optical and acoustic illusion of the neon cavern. They have made you believe that emotional effort and the intensity of yearning act as a magnet. But in the alchemy of frequencies, desire is not a magnet. It is a wall of static. It is the vibrational recognition that you are separated from what you seek. As long as you keep trying to attract things from the perspective of someone who does not have them, the universe, in its perfect harmonic obedience, will return to you exactly the same melody. More experiences, people, and situations that will confirm, with absolute mathematical precision, that indeed you do not have them. You are trapped in an echo of your own emptiness. The dynamics, the anatomy of background noise. To dismantle the fallacy of desperate attraction and awaken to the vibrational mastery of the luminary, we must abandon the psychology of effort and submerge ourselves in the invisible mechanics of metaphysical acoustics. We must understand the most powerful phenomenon, sympathetic resonance, and the paralyzing poison of background noise. Imagine a concert hall in complete silence, where two perfectly tuned grand pianos rest, one in front of the other, separated by several meters. If you approach the first piano and strike the key for the note A at 440 Hz with force, you will observe a miracle of acoustic physics. Without anyone touching it, without any physical cable connecting them, the exact string for the note A on the second piano will begin to vibrate and emit sound on its own. The second piano did not have to desire to sound. It did not have to effort to attract the music. Simply, by being tuned to the same wavelength, the sound wave that traveled through the air found a structure predisposed to accept that specific energy, and both instruments entered into sympathetic resonance. The adjacent strings, the notes C or E, remained in absolute silence because their frequencies were incompatible. The entire universe, matter, events, money, and human relations operate under this same unbreakable law of vibrational sympathy. You do not experience in your life what you want. You experience in your life what you are. You attract that with which you are tuned. But why does the sleepwalker rarely manage to manifest the high-frequency realities he yearns for? Because his mind is a horribly out-of-tune instrument, suffocated by background noise. Background noise is not the sound of cars on the street or the murmur of the television. Background noise is the vibrational static that permanently inhabits the mind of the unawakened individual. It is the incessant chatter of fear of failure. It is the anxiety over the utility bill due tomorrow. It is the silent resentment toward an old friend who betrayed him. It is the toxic guilt injected by religion, the prefabricated indignation of the morning news, and the poisonous comparison with the fake lives paraded on social networks. The consciousness of the sleepwalker is like an old radio that fails to tune into any station clearly. It is trapped between two dials, emitting a constant screech, a cacophony of contradictory frequencies. One part of him wants to ascend and shine, but another part of him vibrates in the terror of being judged. One part wants abundance, but his subconscious vibrates in the belief that money is evil. When this individual attempts to emit the signal to manifest an event of high light purity, such as a harmonious relationship or financial peace, his signal does not come out as a clean and crystalline tone. It comes out wrapped in that background noise. It is a perfect A drowned by the blow of 1,000 dissonant hammers. The external environment, the holographic universe, receives this chaotic signal and does exactly what the law of optics and acoustics dictates. It returns an equally chaotic reflection. Since the sleepwalker's signal is contaminated by fear and doubt, the circumstances that enter into resonance are those that justify fear. His life becomes a succession of false starts, broken promises, fruitless efforts, and cyclical disappointments. The sleepwalker's pain is genuine, and his exhaustion is deeply understandable. There is nothing more draining than pushing the rock uphill every day, only to see it roll down again at dawn. But he must understand, with a candidness that takes his breath away, that the universe is not punishing him. The universe is blind to compassion and deaf to suffering. It only obeys the geometry of waves. If your transmission is a storm of static, the screen of your life can only show you a rainy, distorted image. Background noise is the silent thief of your vital energy. Every internal contradiction, every doubt you do not resolve, every attachment to past drama acts as destructive interference in your electromagnetic field. While you continue giving volume to trivial concerns, your internal tuning fork will be wrapped in mud. And a tuning fork full of mud cannot make the strings of heaven vibrate. The synthesis, the tuning of the awakened prism. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary marks the end of desperate effort and the birth of immaculate synchronization. For the awakened prism, the idea of chasing a dream or attracting a result is a primitive and obsolete concept. The luminary does not run after butterflies. He cultivates a vibrational garden so exquisite and perfectly tuned that the butterflies have no choice but to come and land in it. He understands that manifestation is not an act of centrifugal force, but of centripetal alignment. The synthesis of this power resides in the absolute mastery of internal silence. The luminary executes the systematic silencing of background noise. The path toward pure emanation is not about adding more mantras, nor adding more hours of forced visualization. It is not about adding, it is about subtracting. It is a process of acoustic hygiene. The awakened prism descends to the engine room of his own consciousness and begins to identify every source of static. When anxiety about the future arises, the luminary does not fight against it, as fighting generates more friction and more noise. He simply observes it, withdraws the electrical supply of his attention. He allows the wave to vanish into the vacuum. When the ego tries to emit a screech of envy at seeing another's triumph, the luminary turns off the dial. When society demands that he participate in collective panic, in the hysteria of world crises or the drama of the day, the luminary builds acoustic shielding. He flatly refuses to lend his vibrational instrument to play the symphony of human misery. As the Luminary cleans the dust from his crystal and turns off the transmitters of fear, his mind begins to experience a deep, vast silence, terrifying for the ego, but infinitely fertile for the spirit. In this space of absolute stillness, the background noise falls to zero. It is in this state of grace where the true alchemy of light occurs. Having emptied his inner chamber of all static, the Luminary chooses a single frequency of high purity. If his objective is expansion, he does not desire it from lack. He assumes the wavelength of the goal already fulfilled. He becomes the musical note. If the objective is absolute abundance, the Luminary does not think about abundance. He thinks and vibrates from abundance. He adjusts the tension of his internal strings until his mood and his mathematical certainty resonate perfectly. He resonates exactly as he would resonate if he already possessed all the gold in the world. He enters a state of anticipated fulfillment. Since his mind no longer has background noise, this new frequency he emits is a pure tone, continuous and of colossal amplitude. It is a laser of coherent light. It crosses the space-time matrix without dispersing. And then, the physical universe responds. Not out of mercy, not by magic, but by the inescapable law of sympathetic resonance. By emitting a perfect signal of certainty and possession, the holographic field of reality begins to reconfigure. The people, opportunities, capital, and circumstances tuned to that same octave of success and fulfillment begin to vibrate in unison with him. They materialize in his life with a synchronicity that seems like an inexplicable miracle to the sleepwalker, but which the Luminary recognizes as the simple mechanics of waves. Clients appear without him having to scream in the market. Solutions to complex problems arise in his mind with the clarity of a flash. Strategic alliances are forged without the slightest hint of friction. The Luminary walks through the 3D world as an orchestra conductor who does not even need to move the baton. His mere immaculate presence orders the chaos around him. Observe the supreme invulnerability of this perceptive state. When the sleepwalker loses his job or suffers a setback, his instrument is immediately detuned, entering the frequency of panic, which generates a downward spiral that attracts more misfortune. The Luminary, faced with the same loss, does not allow the external event to touch his internal tuning fork. He protects his frequency with his life. If the external world becomes dark and chaotic, he does not lower his octave to tune into the chaos. He remains anchored, unmovable, emitting his tone of certainty. He knows that external darkness is temporary, and that reality will have no choice but to reorganize to match the unshakable light he continues to radiate from his core. To master the forgotten language of light, you must become the most strict and dictatorial guardian of your own acoustics. You have to stop tolerating vibrational garbage in your life. You must relentlessly audit what you listen to, what you consume visually, the people you dialogue with, and above all, the invisible dialogues you maintain with yourself in the silence of the night. Every time you allow yourself to doubt your own magnificence, every time you lower yourself to participate in gossip, complaint, or resentment, you are dirtying the signal. You are detuning the instrument that the cosmos granted you to sculpt matter. Abandon the vulgarity of desire. Stop begging the hologram to deliver what you think you lack. Withdraw to the stillness of your own center, seal the doors against the neon noise of the cavern, and dedicate your life to cultivating a frequency of such purity, beauty, and density that the entire universe cannot help but sing your same song. When you stop wanting and begin simply to be, the hologram will stop resisting, the veil of illusion will fall, and you will discover that you were always, from the beginning of time, the origin of all the light you were desperately trying to find in the darkness. Chapter 3. The Diffraction of Will. In the hypnotic depths of the neon cavern, there exists a collective hallucination that devours the vitality of its inhabitants with a silent and crushing voracity, the cult of dispersion. The contemporary sleepwalker has been injected with a poisonous belief that confuses frenetic movement with true light expansion. He has been indoctrinated to worship at the altar of multitasking, convinced that his value, brilliance, and success in the holographic web of existence depend on his ability to be everywhere, think about 1,000 things at once, and attend to an infinity of superficial stimuli. This is the mirage of fragmented omnipresence. I deeply understand the anxiety that pushes you toward this abyss. The modern ecosystem is designed, with almost surgical precision, to fragment your attention. From the moment you open your eyes, hundreds of devices, social demands, and projected fears demand a portion of your consciousness. It is natural that in your genuine desire not to be left behind, you try to divide your essence to cover all fronts. Society applauds you when you show yourself perpetually busy. It grants you invisible medals for sacrificing your inner peace for a saturated agenda. They whisper that being a prism projecting light in 1,000 directions is the peak of life. But we must be brutally honest, they are lying to you. This narrative is not a manual for enlightenment. It is a recipe for darkness through exhaustion. Observe the optical X-ray of your own fatigue. The sleepwalker wakes up, and, in the first second of his day, his mind is no longer a lighthouse. It is a mirror thrown against the floor. A fragment of his light is directed toward guilt for the past, another illuminates anxiety about the financial future, another beam is hijacked by social media static, and dozens of small flashes are lost in the opinions of strangers. The sleepwalker believes that by dividing his attention he is conquering the world. In reality, he is suffering a vibrational hemorrhage. By trying to illuminate everything, his light becomes translucent, weak, and unable to reveal the deep texture of reality. He lives in a state of perpetual haze. He works for hours, but at the end of the day, when the noise ceases, he finds himself alone with a terrifying void in his chest. He feels he has run a marathon, but discovers he has not moved a single inch from his place of origin. This is the tragedy of scattered radiance. The neon cavern does not need to turn you off all at once. It is enough to convince you to spread your energy in so many trivial directions that your glow loses its power to transform. Believing that doing 1,000 things at once is synonymous with greatness is the most effective deception to keep you docile. A fire that spreads into 1,000,000 tiny sparks on a field of ice melts nothing. It simply goes out in an instant. You remain a hostage to your own unfocused generosity, vibrating in scarcity. The dynamics, the anatomy of scattered light. To dismantle this hypnosis of multiplicity and prepare your consciousness for the awakening of the luminary, we must move away from the philosophy of hollow productivity and dive into the abstract beauty of wave optics. We must understand the phenomenon that destroys the power of your spirit, diffraction, and the interference patterns. In the study of light waves, diffraction occurs when a front of light encounters an obstacle with multiple narrow slits or sharp edges. If light were a solid and unbreakable entity, it would pass directly through. But light is an expansive wave, and when forced through the slits of dispersion, it undergoes a deep deformation. The original wave divides into multiple secondary waves that bend, open, and overlap with each other in the space beyond the obstacle. The result of this fragmentation is not a clear image, but an interference pattern. On the projection screen, you do not see a bright and defined core. You see a series of blurred fringes. You see areas where the waves collide and cancel each other out, creating darkness, and areas where they manage to add up slightly, creating a pale, blurry glow without defined contours. This optical principle is the painfully exact metaphor for what happens in the sleepwalker's mind. Your will is naturally a high-frequency light. However, the neon cavern presents you with an infinite wall full of tiny slits, the slit of social worry, the slit of work urgency, the slit of gossip, the slit of empty entertainment, the slit of external validation. When you allow the pure light of your will to pass through this filter of distractions, you suffer the diffraction of consciousness. Your vital energy bends, scatters, and loses its fundamental direction. And the result on the holographic screen of your life is exactly a pattern of destructive interference. Observe your reality. You have areas where your efforts cancel each other out, the darkness, and areas of mediocre pale success, the fuzzy fringes. You are a little good at your job, a little present in your relationships, but you lack the searing intensity of mastery in any area. Diffraction robs you of the power of penetration. An ordinary 100-watt incandescent bulb emits light in all directions. It is useful for not tripping over furniture, but its energy is too scattered. You can barely feel its heat if you put your hand a few centimeters away. It cannot alter the structure of matter. It can only bathe the surface of things with superficial clarity. The individual whose will is diffracted is exactly like that bulb. He emits a great deal of total energy, but his light density at any point is miserably low. When this sleepwalker faces a real obstacle, an identity crisis, a financial wall, his diffuse light hits the surface of the problem and bounces off. It illuminates the problem, letting him see it and complain about it, but it completely lacks the thermal intensity necessary to melt it, go through it, or transmute it. This is the metaphysical reason why you feel blocked. It is not because you lack light. Your core is an inexhaustible reactor. You are blocked because your light has been deliberately diffracted by a system that fears your focus. The holographic universe does not surrender to weak and scattered light. Reality only alters its structure under density. The illusion does not change its form when you caress it with 1,000 half-hearted intentions. It only changes when subjected to a vibrational frequency of such overwhelming and sustained density that its own optical illusion cannot withstand the temperature. Diffraction is the poison of mediocrity and the excuse of the ego. By keeping you busy, illuminating trivialities, you are exempt from the terrifying responsibility of igniting a supernova star within you. But if you wish to reclaim your vibrational sovereignty, you must understand that dispersion is not a sign of vitality. It is the unmistakable symptom of a consciousness that has forgotten how to govern. The synthesis, the forging of the coherent beam and the laser of attention. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary demands a renunciation that terrifies the inertial ego, the renunciation of multiplicity. The Awakened Prism understands that omnipotence does not consist of covering everything with a weak light, but in selecting a single point and irradiating it with unnegotiable ferocity. The definitive awakening of your will lies in the transition from diffracted light to coherent light. In metaphysical optics, this is the forging of the laser of attention. The acronym LASER, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation, hides the alchemical secret of mastery. Unlike the light of a bulb, where photons travel in multiple directions with different frequencies out of phase, the light of a laser is deeply coherent. In a laser, all photons possess exactly the same wavelength, all travel exactly in the same direction. And most importantly, all march in unison, their peaks and valleys aligned. There is no diffraction, there is no dispersion, there is no noise. And because of this miraculous coherence, a laser consuming the same 100 watts does not weakly illuminate a room. It concentrates all that energy into a point of fractions of a millimeter, reaching a temperature so extreme it can cut through carbon steel. The luminary is the living embodiment of light coherence. He has learned to gather the thousands of scattered fragments of his consciousness and align them into a single continuous and unbreakable beam. How is this synthesis executed in the theater of your daily life? It begins with the sacred act of saying no. The Awakened Prism becomes a relentless auditor of his own emanations. He observes the slits where his energy escapes and seals them with the coldness of the vacuum. If a relationship does not resonate with his fundamental octave, he withdraws his light. If a distraction tries to diffract his attention, the luminary imposes a barrier. He refuses to be the street lamp that illuminates the steps of those who do not know where they are going. The sleepwalker's ego will scream that, by closing these doors, you are missing out on something. It will instill the terror of exclusion, FOMO. But the luminary smiles at this, knowing that 99% of it is simple visual static. Renouncing dispersion is not a sacrifice. It is the recovery of the most valuable vibrational capital in the cosmos, your capacity for prolonged focus. When the luminary chooses his objective, an empire, emotional healing, or a spiritual mystery, he applies the coherence of wave. He aligns all the photons of his being. His thoughts, emotions, words, and acts stop contradicting each other. There is no longer a thought that doubts while an emotion desires. There is no action that sabotages while a word promises. All his vibrational spectrum synchronizes at the same frequency and points toward the same coordinate of the hologram. He enters the state of logical flow, an immersion so deep in the present moment that the concept of psychological time disintegrates. In this state, the consciousness of the luminary acts as the laser beam. By focusing your will with this absolute purity, you discover the miracle of perceptive physics. The holographic reality cannot resist sustained attention. When you apply the laser of your consciousness on an obstacle, the obstacle begins to heat up. Its structural lies begin to melt. Excuses that before seemed like unbreachable walls of concrete are revealed as simple veils of smoke. The illusion of scarcity, the pain of rejection, or the complexity of a challenge surrender and fracture under the immense light density of your fixed gaze. The power of manifestation does not reside in desiring intensely for 5 minutes and then diffracting your mind into anxieties for the rest of the day. The power resides in keeping the beam of light turned on, fixed, and unperturbable upon your vision, without blinking, regardless of the background noise that the cavern tries to emit around you. When you learn not to look away, you force reality to look away. You force the hologram to rewrite its code. Your mind was designed to be the most formidable optical instrument of creation. You were not born to be a vague, diffuse and complacent glow that everyone can look at without their eyes hurting. You were born to blind mediocrity. You were born to concentrate the scattered forces of the universe in your own attention. Pick up your fragments. Forgive the blindness of your years of dispersion, but do not tolerate the diffraction of your vital energy for 1 more second. Select the coordinate of your mastery, align the oscillation of your soul, and fire the continuous, relentless, and pure ray of your indivisible attention. When the laser of your will reaches its maximum coherence, you will discover that there are no barriers in the 3-dimensional world. There is only matter waiting to be cut, transmuted, and elevated by the unnegotiable intensity of a light that finally has remembered its own power. Chapter 4: The Holographic Mirage of Matter. At the core of human anguish, buried under layers of conditioning and primitive survival, lies the densest and most convincing hallucination of the neon cavern, the blind and devoted faith in the solidity of the physical world. The sleepwalker, from the instant his infant hands touch the crib, is indoctrinated in the cult of matter. He is taught to rely exclusively on the testimony of his nerve endings, to believe that what he can touch, weigh, measure, and strike is the only unmovable reality of the universe. He is convinced that walls are final, that physical objects possess an existence independent of the observer, and that flesh, steel, and gold are the final judges. This tactile hypnosis, this reverential terror before the dense we call the holographic mirage of matter. I deeply understand why this illusion feels so suffocatingly real to you. When you strike your hand against a wooden table, the pain that blooms in your skin seems like irrefutable proof that the table is a solid, absolute entity. The neon cavern sustains itself on this premise. It bombards you with the urgency to accumulate things, to protect your possessions, and to be terrified of physical scarcity. The modern ecosystem demands that you base your security on the accumulation of dense matter, properties, bank accounts, security barriers, and titles. It whispers that if you manage to surround yourself with enough solid objects, you will finally be safe from the chaos of the universe. But observe the vibrational X-ray of this life, dedicated to the cult of stone. The sleepwalker lives in a state of perpetual exhaustion because he tries to alter his reality by wrestling matter. His existence is a war of incessant friction. If he does not like the scenery of his life, he tries to push the heavy furniture of his reality with his bare hands. If he faces a financial wall, a social barrier, or a disease, he throws himself against that wall, striking it until his spiritual knuckles bleed and ache. He becomes frustrated, ages prematurely, and sinks into depression upon discovering that matter is stubborn, resistant, and cruel in the face of linear effort. The supreme tragedy of the sleepwalker is that he lives trapped in a cinema, weeping in terror at the film projected before him, trying to erase the monsters by rubbing the screen. He wastes his vital energy scratching the white canvas, shouting at the images to change shape, pleading with the shadows to be kinder. He ignores with a perceptive innocence that costs him his entire life, that the screen is simply an inert surface where light crashes. He ignores that matter has no power of decision or will. Matter is simply the end point of a luminous journey, the place where vibration becomes visible. As long as the ordinary individual keeps believing that his bank account, his physical body, and the barriers of his environment are the truth to be conquered by brute force, he will remain a slave to the mirage. He will live terrified by scarcity, because in the world of the solid, if someone takes an apple, there is one less apple for him. Dense matter appears to be finite, limited, and exclusive. By worshipping the physical form, the sleepwalker voluntarily exiles himself from the realm of infinite possibilities, condemning himself to beg. The dynamics, slowed light, and the projection of the hologram. To dismantle the blasphemy of solidity and awaken to the fluid omnipotence of the luminary, we must move away from the illusion of touch and submerge ourselves in the deep mysticism of wave optics and frequency synthesis. We must understand the true nature of the 3D world, the dense hologram of trapped light. The truth that the neon cavern hides from you with such secrecy is of an abstract and devastating beauty. Solid matter does not exist. What your senses interpret as a hard, resistant, and unmovable world is, in its most intimate essence, an immense and unfathomable symphony of light that has slowed its speed. Matter is nothing other than luminous energy vibrating at a frequency so low, so heavy, and so dense that it becomes perceptible to the rudimentary biological sensors of your body. You are light touching slowed down light. The universe you inhabit is not a container full of separate objects. It is a field of interference. In optical holography, to create a three-dimensional image that seems to have volume and presence, one does not sculpt a block of marble. One takes a pure laser beam, consciousness, divides it in two, and makes these two beams of light bounce and collide with each other. The interference pattern contains the information. When you illuminate that pattern again, the 3D image is projected in space, floating like a ghost so perfect that your eyes would swear you can touch it. The physical world is the hologram, and the projector is not a machine external to you. The projector is consciousness itself, the core of your own emanation. Your deep mind, intertwined with the unified field of all minds, the collective unconscious that sustains the neon cavern, constantly emits frequencies of beliefs, fears, certainties, and assumptions. These invisible waves of consciousness travel, collide, interact, and condense. When a belief becomes dense enough, it crystals. When the vibration of a belief becomes constant and sustained, its frequency descends and crystallizes on the screen of space-time. It becomes a fact, it becomes a wall, it becomes a physical body, an empty bank account, or a prosperous empire. Solidity is simply an optical illusion created by sustained repetition. A fan turned off reveals three blades separated by space, but if you turn it on and make it spin at high speed, your eyes will perceive a solid disk, and if you try to put your hand in, your fingers will bounce off the illusion of that solidity. Your three-dimensional perception deceives you constantly. When the sleepwalker crashes against a problem in his life, he is crashing against the blades of a holographic fan that he himself, or the collective of which he is a part, has set in motion. The lethal error is trying to stop the fan by putting your hand in, trying to fight against matter already manifested. The neon cavern is designed to keep you hypnotized by the projection. It surrounds you with noisy screens, alarming news, prefabricated crises, and material urgencies to ensure your attention is permanently fixed on the hologram. As long as you look obsessively at the screen, you will keep feeling fear. Fear is a dense, heavy, and low-vibration frequency. By feeling fear before the hologram, your internal projector keeps emitting the same condensed light, feeding back the image and making the walls of your physical prison seem thicker and taller every day. It is a closed loop of optical illusion sustained by terror. The synthesis, fluid detachment, and the mastery of the projector. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary marks the instant of absolute lucidity where the observer turns around in the cinema. The awakened prism looks away from the screen, stops weeping for the drama of the shadows, and directs his attention backward, toward the bright and all-powerful projection booth. The awakening is the assimilation of fluid detachment. The luminary understands that since matter is slowed light, wrestling with it is an act of vibrational vulgarity. The awakened prism repudiates physical struggle. He does not try to destroy 3D obstacles with his fists, for he knows you cannot break a hologram. If you hit a hologram, your hand simply passes through it or exhausts itself against the illusion of density. But the image remains unaltered as long as the projector is still on. The alchemy of transformation, the true magic that the luminary exerts over the universe, is performed exclusively in the room of origin. The awakened prism masters reality by adjusting the lens and changing the slide of his own internal frequency. When the luminary faces a dense and hostile manifestation in the physical plane, a financial ruin or the collapse of a structure, his first reaction is absolute stillness. He stops his frantic movement. Unlike the sleepwalker, who panics and starts running desperately trying to do things to fix the material world, the luminary halts. He recognizes that the disaster before his eyes is the past. It is the luminous echo of an ancient vibration that has just crystallized. Matter always arrives late. It is the result. Therefore, the luminary applies fluid detachment. He does not reject the material experience or deny it blindly, but he withdraws his emotional belief. He contemplates the solid wall and, with a cold smile, tells the obstacle, "I know what you are. You are scared light. You have no power over me." By withdrawing his panic and his validation from the solidity of the wall, the luminary executes an acoustic recalibration in his core. He alters his frequency. He uses the unshakable law of resonance to raise his own internal oscillation above fear. He tunes his fork with the octave of absolute certainty. In the science of cymatics, when you change the frequency of sound through a metal plate covered in sand, the chaotic grains suddenly rise and reorganize into a new, perfect pattern. The sand, matter, did not decide to move. It was forced to obey the new vibrational matrix. You are that vibration. In the same way, by altering the slide in his mental projector, the luminary sends a new wave of coherent light toward the holographic fabric of his reality. And here occurs the perceptive miracle that the ordinary world calls luck. The external hologram, lacking the light of fear, begins to lose cohesion. The problem that seemed insurmountable suddenly crumbles on its own. An investor appears, a law is modified, or a key person changes their mind. The luminary passes through the old barrier not because he broke it with a hammer, but because he raised his frequency to a state so subtle he passed through. He altered the physical world by refusing to interact with it in its own heavy terms. Fluid detachment is not apathy. It is the supreme posture of spiritual domination. It is the deep understanding that nothing in the outer world deserves for you to detune your inner instrument. You remove the cavern's weapon. Your bank account and your status are simple temporary accumulations of photons. If today the screen shows you emptiness, do not weep before the white canvas. Enter the sanctuary of your consciousness, calibrate your oscillation toward abundance, ignite your laser, and allow the light to flow again. To inhabit the world as a true awakened prism, you must walk the streets knowing you walk through a dream sculpted in light. Enjoy the texture of the table, but never forget that you are the creator of the mirage, not its prisoner. When you stop crashing against walls, you discover reality is clay. Reality is the softest, most obedient clay in the cosmos, always ready to melt and reconfigure before the serene gaze of a consciousness that has remembered its own unfathomable power of projection. You are the projector, the light, and the screen. Once you know this, the game of solidity is over. Chapter 5. Photoluminescence and the Death of the Reflection. In the vast and desolate immensity of the neon cavern, there exists a vibrational pathology so widespread and normalized that entire humanity has confused it with the nature of love, success, and identity. We shall call this disease of perception the lunar syndrome. To the sleepwalker, from the instant he emits his first cry. From the instant he emits his first cry in this three-dimensional hologram, he is indoctrinated in the heresy of light insufficiency. He is convinced, through millennia of social conditioning, that his own core is dark, cold, and sterile. He is taught that, to possess value, he must go out and beg for the light of others. He is programmed to become an anxious mirror, a polished surface that only acquires meaning when the flash of others' approval hits his face. Observe the optical X-ray of this collective tragedy. The ordinary individual walks through the world convinced that he is a moon, and the moon, despite inspiring countless poems, despite reigning in the night sky, the moon hides an astronomical and metaphysical secret of abysmal sadness. The moon has no light of its own. It is an inert, grey, frozen and dead rock. Its apparent silver glow is a gigantic optical illusion. It is simply the passive bounce of photons emitted by a distant star. The sleepwalker structures his entire life around this lunar dependence. He enters into partnerships not to share a harmonic resonance, but to use the other as a personal sun to illuminate his void. He works until chronic exhaustion, not for the joy of creation, but to collect looks of admiration from his superiors. His identity is a fragile mosaic, built exclusively with the reflections of external opinions. If the sleepwalker publishes an image in the holographic network of the neon cavern and receives hundreds of validations, his surface reflects that light and he feels a transitory euphoria. He feels that he shines. He feels that he exists. But this borrowed light is a spectral food that does not nourish the soul. It is a high-frequency, very short-duration glow that dissipates as soon as the mob's attention shifts to another mirror. The most heartbreaking drama of the lunar syndrome is the perpetual paranoia of the eclipse. Whoever depends on borrowed light lives terrified of the shadow. The sleepwalker knows, in the depths of his silenced intuition, that his radiance is a fraud. He knows that if his partner leaves him, or if society decides to look elsewhere, his light will go out in a millisecond. He experiences the total eclipse. When the external sun withdraws its attention, the sleepwalker experiences the total eclipse of his soul. He sinks into depression, panic, and the sensation of absolute annihilation. Because when the reflection is turned off, he realizes that beneath that borrowed light there is only a cold and stony abyss. Society fosters this state of optical beggary because a world of moons is docile, predictable, and easy to govern. Whoever needs to be looked at to feel they are worth something is willing to sacrifice their essence, their truth, and their purest oscillation just to not lose the attention of the projector. He becomes a vibrational chameleon, adjusting his behavior and his clothing to ensure that the angle of incidence of social light continues to bounce off his skin. As long as the individual continues to believe that his brightness is the result of ecosystem validation, he will remain a slave to the refraction of others. He will live like an actor on an empty stage, hysterically pleading with the lighting technician not to turn off the follow spot, ignoring with an unpardonable spiritual amnesia that the universe did not design him to be a projection screen. It designed him to be the burning core of his own galaxy. The dynamics, the albedo of the ego and the blindness of reflection. To dismantle the hypnosis of the reflection and awaken to the autonomous majesty of the luminary, we must abandon the psychology of attachment and submerge ourselves in the abstract purity of radiometry and emission optics. We must understand the difference between the albedo of the ego and photoluminescence. In the physics of light, there is a measurement known as albedo. Albedo is the percentage of light radiation that a surface reflects in relation to the light incident upon it. A perfect mirror would have an albedo of 100%, bouncing all the light without absorbing anything. Dark asphalt has a low albedo. The sleepwalker's mind operates strictly under the laws of emotional albedo. The ego is a polished surface that does not know how to generate photons. It only knows how to bounce them. When the ordinary individual receives a compliment, his ego reflects that light and emits a flash of arrogance or satisfaction. When he receives a critique, the light hits the irregular surface of his traumas and scatters in the form of anger or resentment. The sleepwalker's entire life is a game of mirrors, a constant calculation of the angle of incidence and the angle of reflection. His only concern is, how do I look under this light? This dynamics of constant bounce generates an absolute sterility. Reflected light cannot initiate the process of spiritual photosynthesis. It cannot transform reality. It can only react to it. The sleepwalker who lives bouncing the expectations of his parents will never know his true color. He is a blank canvas. He has been painted so many times by the lasers of society that he has completely forgotten his own original texture. The terror of the void is the natural consequence of operating under the regime of albedo. The ego knows it is not an emitter. It knows that in the deep space far from other stars, it is invisible. That is why the sleepwalker flees from silence. He fills his schedule with events, saturates his ears with deafening music, and surrounds his life with toxic people, preferring the distorted and sickly light of a bad relationship rather than facing the darkness of his own absence of emission. He prefers a gas lamp. But in the optics of higher frequencies, there is a phenomenon that defies the passivity of the reflection: luminescence, and more specifically, photoluminescence. Certain minerals and certain consciousnesses possess a magical quality. When a photoluminescent material receives light, it does not just bounce it. The material absorbs that energy, introduces it into its atomic structure, excites its own electrons, raising them to a higher level of vibration, and then, in an act of pure alchemy, emits its own light. The photon coming out of a photoluminescent mineral is not the same photon that went in. It is a new photon. It has a different wavelength and a unique color that belongs exclusively to the chemical nature of that mineral. It is light synthesized from within. And the most beautiful thing, even when you remove the external light source, it continues to shine on its own for hours, radiating metabolized energy. This persistent glow in the dark is called phosphorescence. The universe reveals to us through the excitation of electrons that we are not condemned to be dead mirrors. Matter and spirit have the latent capacity to absorb the chaotic spectrum of the environment and transmute it into a constant emission. The theorem of emanation decrees that absolute power does not belong to those who manage to have all the spotlights illuminate them, but to those who manage to shine with such intensity from within that the external spotlights become aesthetically irrelevant. You are your own light source in the deep void. The synthesis, the stellar core, and the death of the reflection. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary marks the instant of nuclear ignition. It is the sacred, silent, and overwhelming moment in which the awakened prism decrees the death of the reflection and ignites its own main sequence reactor. To the luminary, begging for attention is a violation of sovereignty. He renounces being the moon of others' solar systems and assumes the immense responsibility of becoming a sovereign star, driven by the inexhaustible fusion of his own purpose. The synthesis of this mastery begins with an act of deliberate isolation and optical purification. The luminary executes a blackout. He withdraws from artificial light sources. He moves away from applause, turns off the need for approval, and voluntarily dives into the darkness of his own void. For the inertial ego, this darkness is hell, where identity dies from lack of food. But for the awakened prism, darkness is the black canvas. It is the canvas necessary to calibrate one's own luminescence. In that visual silence, the luminary asks the only question that matters in the alchemy of frequencies. Who am I when no one is watching me? What is my color when there is no external light bouncing off me? Ignition requires abandoning albedo. It requires embracing alchemical absorption. Unlike the sleepwalker who bounces pain or critique, the luminary absorbs the experiences of his life. He takes betrayal, failure, and loneliness, which are ultraviolet radiations, invisible and painful, and introduces them into his atomic nucleus. He metabolizes them. He allows that dense energy to excite the frequencies of his consciousness, raising them to a higher state of understanding and frozen wisdom. And then, in the center of his being, fusion occurs. The luminary transmutes that pain into spiritual photoluminescence. He begins to radiate his own light. He begins to generate his own validation. The luminary does not need his partner to tell him he is loved to feel love. He becomes the inexhaustible source of love that he pours over himself. He does not need society to grant him a title of greatness. He emanates a frequency of deep dignity. His sense of purpose is not a prize hung on his chest at the end of a race. It is the nuclear reactor that keeps him beating, expanding, and creating, even if he were locked in an underground cell in complete solitude. Observe the absolute invulnerability of a consciousness that has killed the reflection. When the 3D ecosystem becomes hostile and the sun of public approval is eclipsed, the sleepwalkers around him panic and disappear into the shadows. They turn off. But the Luminary, driven by his own internal phosphorescence, continues to shine with the same dazzling intensity in the darkest night. Economic crises or social abandonment cannot turn him off because his switch is not connected to society's power grid. His switch is wired directly to the infinity of his own being. In fact, it is in absolute darkness where the true nature of the Luminary becomes undeniable. He is the reference. When the neon lights of the cavern fail, the internal star of the Awakened Prism becomes the only visual point of reference in the hologram. Those who previously ignored or judged him are suddenly drawn to him, like desperate moths seeking the heat of the only flame that is not extinguished under the storm. But the Luminary does not shine for them. He does not emit his frequency to be worshipped or to claim subjects. His emanation is an act of pure nature, a vibrational imperative. The sun does not shine so that the planets thank it. The sun shines because it is composed of hydrogen in fusion. It cannot do anything else but radiate its truth. If planets decide to orbit it and warm themselves with its light, it is a side effect of its geometric immensity, not the goal of its existence. The death of the reflection annihilates dependence. Human relationships and business acquire a new dimension. You no longer come into contact with the world to extract value. You come into contact with the world to overflow your own overabundance of photons. Your relationships cease to be contracts of emotional parasitism to become dances of constructive resonance between two independent stars. Work becomes a canvas. To forge this stellar core in the center of your chest, you must commit an act of heresy against your own ego. You must stop checking your image in the mirror of others. Break the polished surface of your need to please. Assume the rough and authentic texture of your own voice. Be your own sun. Next time you feel the panic of the eclipse, when the attention or affection of others withdraws and you feel you are fading into the shadow, stop cold. Do not run to beg for the light to be returned. Stay still in the darkness. Feel the void. And in that absolute silence, give the internal command. Turn on the generators of your own unconditional value. You will discover that the darkness was not a tomb designed to bury you. It was the dark room designed to show you that the brightest, warmest, and most indestructible light in the universe was always waiting for its release in your own solitude. Chapter 6. The Density of the Shadow and the Blank Canvas. In the immense and saturated visual architecture of the neon cavern, an aesthetic and spiritual dogma has been erected that poisons human perception from its foundations, the absolute panic of darkness. The sleepwalker, from his first interaction with mass-market morality, has been indoctrinated into the tyranny of perpetual light. He has been inoculated with the infantile and deeply castrating belief that enlightenment consists of the total eradication of the shadow. He is taught that dark thoughts, melancholy, and primordial rage are vibrational anomalies or sins that must be purged to be worthy of inhabiting the holographic web of the universe. We shall call this sickly obsession with sterile clarity, this terror of one's own density, the illusion of false purity. Observe the optical X-ray and the vital wear of the sleepwalker who pursues this mirage. His existence is an exhausting crusade against his own nature. He thinks his mind must be an impeccably white room. When a dense emotion, a flash of rage or a pulse of unfathomable sadness appears in his consciousness, the sleepwalker enters vibrational panic. He feels he has become dirty. He feels his vibration has fallen, that he has failed, and he runs to cover that shadow with empty affirmations and plastic smiles. But the physics of visual perception is inclement with purists. What the sleepwalker ignores, with a blindness that condemns him to emotional flatness, is that a world without shadows is not paradise. It is a form of optical torture. In medicine, there is a phenomenon called snow blindness. It is a loss of depth perception. When an explorer walks through a landscape where the white sky merges with white snow, the human eye loses the ability to perceive depth. The brain, receiving only white light from all directions, becomes completely disoriented. The explorer trips and falls into precipices because light without contrast erases forms. The sleepwalker who represses his shadow suffers from spiritual snow blindness. By trying to be only light, love, and positivity, his personality loses all its relief. He becomes a two-dimensional, flat, boring, and predictable human being. His smile lacks the magnetic warmth of genuine empathy. He is unable to understand the pain in the eyes of others because he has never descended into his own abysses. His goodness is fragile because it is not the result of having mastered his demons, but of having locked them in the basement, pretending they do not exist. This repression requires a monumental expenditure of energy. Keeping the searchlights on all day to ensure the shadow does not escape consumes the vital battery of the ordinary individual. He lives exhausted, terrified that one day the lights will fail and the world will discover the monster or the void he hides. He believes the blank canvas is the finished work of art. He fails to see that a blank canvas is nothing more than the empty promise of a painting that the artist was too afraid to begin, terrified of staining the purity of the cloth with the dense and dark colors of the human experience. He is a guardian of nothingness, a curator of an unlived and colorless existence. The dynamics, vibrational chiaroscuro, and the optics of contrast. To dismantle the blasphemy of false purity and awaken to the aesthetic and spiritual omnipotence of the luminary, we must abandon the morality of black and white and dive into the deep mystery of visual alchemy. We must understand the optical phenomenon that gives meaning to light, the law of contrast and chiaroscuro. In the art of classical painting, the masters of the Renaissance and the Baroque discovered a fundamental secret about 3D perception on a flat canvas. They discovered chiaroscuro. They understood that for a face to seem to jump from the canvas, vibrant with life and volume, it was not enough to paint it with bright colors. The secret of three-dimensionality resided in the darkness that surrounded it. The deeper and more absorbing the black background, the more dazzling and alive the light appeared. Light could not reveal form if there was no gloom to define the limit of that form. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the partner. In the physics of optics, darkness is not a malignant force attacking photons. Darkness is simply the canvas that receives, absorbs, and gives context to light frequencies. Without the shadow, light has no medium to show its directionality or intensity. If you fire a laser through a vacuum, you will not see it. The beam is invisible. You can only see the majestic flash of the laser if there are dust particles in the air that block the light and cast tiny shadows, revealing the path of the beam. Your consciousness operates under this same holographic architecture. Your dense emotions are not vibrational errors. Sadness, fear of death, and raw biological appetites are not demonic entities trying to turn off your light. They are the low-frequency areas, the high optical density pigments granted to you so that you can give volume, texture, and depth to the projection of your soul. They are the anchors of your reality. When the sleepwalker attempts to amputate these dense frequencies, he is trying to erase the dust from the air, making his own ray of light invisible. The shadow has a magnetic and stabilizing function in your vibrational field. Think of acoustics. A symphony is not composed only of high, bright notes. If it were, the music would be strident and unbearable after a few minutes. The overwhelming beauty of an orchestra is achieved when deep bass notes, the grave notes of cellos, and heavy resonance drums sustain the rhythmic structure. That acoustic darkness is the ground upon which violins can rise. Your dark instincts and your wounds are the bass of your personal symphony. They connect you to the earth. They grant you the gravity necessary so that, when you choose to emit the light of your purpose, that light is not a fleeting flash, but a firm fire, anchored and sustained by the density of your experience. The dynamics of reality demand the full spectrum. To exclude the gloom from your life is to reject half of the electromagnetic spectrum that the cosmos put at your disposal to sculpt your mastery. You cannot have the peak without the valley. You cannot have the star without the velvet blackness of space. The synthesis. The integration of the abyss and the luminary's brush. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary marks the instant of aesthetic absolution. It is the moment of supreme stillness in which the awakened prism stops running from his own monsters, stops in the middle of his own internal abyss, and embraces the totality of his vibrational spectrum. The luminary does not aspire to the sterile purity of immaterial angels. He claims the complete sovereignty of the 3D human being. He adopts the mystique of integration. Awakening is consolidated when you understand that you are not the blank canvas, but the master painter who holds the palette. The luminary does not repress the shadow. He audits it, masters it, and uses it as the perfect contrast to ignite his luminosity. How is this integration executed in the day-to-day holographic experience? It manifests through the end of internal war. He ceases the conflict between what he is and what he should be. When a crisis assails the life of the luminary and a wave of darkness threatens to swallow him, a period of acute pain or a social humiliation, he does not turn on the alarms of the neon cavern. He does not repeat positive affirmations in a neurotic attempt to drown the fear. He turns off the superficial lights. The awakened prism descends to the basement of his own psyche in complete silence. He observes his own sadness and his own rage. Instead of feeling shame, he feels fascination. He observes the texture of that shadow. He feels its weight and density. He understands that energy is vibrational raw material. Instead of spending 90% of his life force pushing a door to keep the wolf of the shadow locked up, the luminary opens the door. He lets the wolf in, sits beside it, and puts a collar of obedience on it. By stopping the resistance to darkness, the fear loses its holographic power. Rage stops being a poison and transmutes into a frozen, focused determination. Pain stops being an open wound and becomes the dark well of empathy and artistic depth. Observe the colossal invulnerability this grants you in the ecosystem of human relations. The sleepwalker lives terrified of judgment. If someone discovers his shadow, his past errors or unconfessable weaknesses, he can be blackmailed or cancelled by the mob. The sleepwalker hands his power to anyone who can threaten to expose his darkness. The luminary, having integrated his shadow, is absolutely inoffendable and unmanipulable. You cannot blackmail a man who walks carrying his shadow before him as a banner of honor. When the world attacks him, accusing him of having defects, the luminary does not defend himself with excuses. He looks at them with the serenity of an unfathomable consciousness and nods. He recognizes his density. He knows he contains both the devouring abyss and the star that illuminates it. Precisely because he knows the dimensions of his own potential evil, he is the only one who can choose, with absolute freedom, to emit good. The sleepwalker's goodness is cowardice. The luminary's goodness is a choice of mastery. He is harmless not because he lacks fangs, but because he has decided to keep them sheathed under the absolute control of his conscious light. By assimilating the gloom, you become a master of holographic chiaroscuro. Your creations in the material world acquire a depth that magnetizes humanity. When you speak, your words do not sound like plastic echoes. They resonate with the gravity of one who has walked through hell and returned with cold skin and radiant eyes. Your art and your business acquire the texture of the authentic. People will feel drawn to you without being able to explain why. Their souls recognize that in you, the tension between light and shadow has found a harmonic resolution. To forge this integration, you must sign the non-aggression pact against your own humanity today. Extirpate guilt from your vocabulary. You have absolute permission from the cosmos to feel fury. You have the mathematical authorization of the universe to inhabit melancholy when your cycle requires it. You are not a defective machine when you fall into the shadow. You are a planetary ecosystem that needs the night so its systems can recalibrate and prepare the stage for the next dawn. Stop frantically rubbing the canvas of your life. A blank canvas has no history and no soul. Dip the brush of your attention into the densest, darkest, and most painful inks of your experience. Use those deep tones to outline your ambitions. Use failure as the black background for your supernova victory. When you understand the universe does not demand you be a deity of pure light, but a complete artist, the neon cavern will lose its grip. You will no longer need artificial lights to pretend there is no darkness, for you will have discovered that it is in the heart of your shadow where your true spirit waited. Chapter 7. Translucency and the Crystal Armor. In the deepest and noisiest galleries of the Neon Cavern, a doctrine of survival based on chronic fear and suffocating isolation prevails. To the sleepwalker, from the instant he experiences his first emotional wound in the social hologram, he is indoctrinated in the architecture of opacity. He is convinced that the universe is a hostile field. He is told that the world is a field of predatory gazes and that to survive intact, he must build insurmountable walls around his core. He is taught to build a dense, heavy, and dark fortress where he can hide his insecurities, his failures, his innermost longings, and his naked truth. We shall call this the illusion of the asphalt fortress. Observe the optical X-ray of this self-inflicted prison. The ordinary individual walks through the world carrying lead armor. He spends his days designing and sustaining a mask or an immaculate personal brand, an opaque facade destined to project perfection, invulnerability, and constant success. He refuses to be seen as he truly is. If he feels fear, he raises a wall of arrogance so that no one notices. If he feels sadness, he covers himself with a layer of icy indifference. If he has failed in a project or a relationship, he buries the evidence under tons of justifications and white lies. The sleepwalker believes, with the naivety of a child who covers his eyes. He thinks that if no one can see his cracks, then the cracks cannot be attacked. But this strategy of concealment demands a catastrophic vibrational tribute. Maintaining an opaque wall is the act that consumes the most energy in the entire spectrum of human consciousness. The sleepwalker lives in a state of perpetual paranoia. He scans the holographic horizon, terrified that an indiscreet question, a rumor, or a direct attack might pierce his armor and expose the soft flesh of his truth. He lives like a sentinel who cannot sleep, guarding the gates of his own falsehood. This chronic vigilance exhausts his light reserves. His glow becomes dim and obscured. The cruelest irony of the Neon Cavern is that opacity does not protect you, it makes you a perfect target. When the sleepwalker hides behind a dense facade, he believes he is safe from the mob's projectiles. He ignores, with a geometric and optical ignorance that costs him his peace, that solid walls are precisely the only things hit. Solid structures are the only ones that can be demolished. If you present yourself as an unbreakable stone wall, the 3D world, in its infinite dance of collisions, will feel the natural impulse to test your resistance. The mob will launch scrutiny, criticism, envy, and judgment against your wall. It receives the full impact of every blow. The individual who worships opacity suffers horribly at criticism. A single derogatory comment crashes against his facade and makes his entire psychological structure tremble. He takes offense, enrages, attacks back, and engages in exhausting arguments to defend his image. He does not realize that the pain does not come from the attack. The pain comes from the colossal friction generated when a wave of hostile light hits a surface that stubbornly refuses to let it pass. While you keep believing that your safety depends on how well you hide your essence, you will remain a prisoner in a dark fortress, slowly suffocating under the weight of your own armor. The dynamics, opaque absorption, and the optics of transmission. To dismantle the blasphemy of masks and awaken to the supreme invulnerability of the Luminary, we must abandon the architecture of fear and dive into the abstract purity of material optics. We must understand how light interacts with matter and discover the phenomenon that makes destructive frequencies lose all their power, transmission. In the physics of light, when a beam of photons travels through space and hits an opaque and dense object, such as a block of black asphalt or a steel wall, the light cannot continue its path. The object interposes. The photons collide with the surface, and their kinetic energy is brutally absorbed by the atoms of the material. What is the result of this absorption? Atomic chaos. The atoms of the opaque object begin to vibrate violently, transforming the light into heat. If the light is intense and prolonged enough, the opaque object overheats. It expands, deforms, suffers structural stress, and eventually cracks and breaks under the pressure of temperature. Opacity destroys the object from within by forcing it to swallow energy it cannot process. This is exactly the anatomy of emotional suffering in the unawakened ego. When the environment emits a hostile frequency, a fierce criticism, a rejection, or an insult, that word is simply an acoustic and light wave traveling through the hologram. If your ego is opaque, full of hidden insecurities, rigid pride, and masks to defend, the wave hits you. You absorb the insult. Your mind overheats with rage, indignation, and shame. Your emotional structure cracks because you have tried to stop the wave with your own density. You have made yourself a solid target for the blow. But the optical universe offers us a miraculous alternative. What happens when that same beam of intense light, capable of melting asphalt, hits a window of perfectly transparent and pure crystal? The crystal offers no resistance. It does not try to defend itself from the light. It does not try to catch it or block it. Since its molecular structure is translucent and orderly, the crystal allows the photons to pass through its body without interrupting their trajectory. The light enters one side and exits the other. As a result of this non-resistance, the crystal does not absorb the energy of the beam. It does not overheat at all. Its atoms do not enter into chaos. You can project the most intense and hostile light beam in the universe through a perfect crystal prism, and if you touch the crystal immediately after, you will find it is absolutely cool, icy, and unaltered. The light passed through it with fury, but finding no friction, it left no damage. The theorem of translucency decrees that true invulnerability in the holographic plane is not achieved by building thicker, heavier shells resistant to impacts. It is achieved by purifying the internal structure until nothing dense remains against which impacts can crash. Mastery is being the space through which arrows pass. The synthesis, radical disarmament, and the immaculate crystal. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary marks the instant of radical disarmament. It is the dizzying moment, terrifying for the ego but infinitely liberating for the spirit, in which the awakened prism decides to drop the armor, tear down the asphalt walls, and stand naked in the middle of the three-dimensional matrix. The luminary repudiates opacity. He understands that having secrets is having hostages, and that he who has something to hide will always live at the mercy of the extortionists of the neon cavern. The awakening is consolidated when you adopt the frequency of absolute translucency. You become the crystal armor. How is this alchemy executed in the theater of your daily life? It manifests through the end of structural lying and the adoption of an icy, unnegotiable, and almost sociopathic authenticity. The luminary audits his life and eradicates masks. He stops pretending he has no fears or hiding his past failures from the crowd. He integrates his shadow and puts it on the table in full view of everyone. Observe the operative monstrosity of this state. When the sleepwalker is attacked by someone trying to expose a flaw, for example, a past financial bankruptcy, the sleepwalker panics, denies it, sweats, and suffers because the projectile hit his facade. But when the enemy attempts the same attack against the luminary, the attack fails comically. The enemy fires the criticism, "You failed miserably in your previous project." The hostile light beam is directed toward the luminary, but the luminary is made of crystal. He has no hidden insecurity regarding that failure. He has already processed it, assimilated it, and it causes him no shame. Therefore, instead of raising a wall of denial, the luminary simply smiles with a disturbing peace and responds, "Of course I failed. It was an absolute catastrophe and I lost all my capital. It was a fascinating lesson. What else do you have?" The attack passes through the crystal without encountering resistance. The enemy is left without ammunition and without levers of power. You cannot blackmail a man who feels comfortable with his own ruin. You cannot humiliate a woman who walks dressed in her own truth without apologizing. You are beyond their reach. When you possess the crystal armor, insults, judgments, and poisonous projections of society enter one ear and exit the other, traveling through the vacuum of your non-resistance without generating a single degree of thermal temperature in your consciousness. You remain cold while the world outside is burning. This translucency grants you a colossal energy economy. Since you no longer have to memorize the lies you told or sustain the heavy smokescreen of your reputation, all that light energy returns to your core. Your glow multiplies. You become light, agile, and of a hypnotic clarity. You move without any friction. Do not confuse this transparency with the vulgar exhibitionism of the neon cavern, where sleepwalkers vomit their intimate dramas on social media seeking compassion. The Luminary's translucency is not a cry for attention, it is a vibrational state of silence and detachment. He does not go around confessing to strangers. He simply operates from the geometric certainty that if someone were to look into his soul, they would find no locked room, no dark basement to be ashamed of, and no facade to sustain. By becoming transparent, you also acquire the ability to refract the light of the environment at will, like a master prism. Since you are not busy defending yourself, your mind has the optical clarity to see exactly where the attacks are coming from. You understand that when someone insults you, that wave of light has nothing to do with you. It is simply the projection of the attacker's own opaque insecurities. Their judgment defines them. By letting their judgment pass through your crystal, you can observe the attacker's wound with a cold and lucid compassion without getting involved in their storm. To forge this crystal armor, you must commit an act of treason against your own pride today. You have to renounce the right to be offended. Offense is the definitive proof that you still have opaque walls. If it hurts what the world says about you, it is because you secretly fear they are right, or because your ego demands to be revered. Abandon the need to always be right, and the need to look immaculate to the eyes of minds living in blindness. Dismantle the facade. Assume the totality of your biography with your head held high. Accept that you are a work in progress within a temporary hologram. When you stop fearing the gaze of others and allow the light of reality to pass through you without resistance, you will discover the icy and divine peace of the untouchable. You will have ceased to be a heavy target in society's shooting range, transmuting into the perfect and transparent lens through which the universe observes itself in absolute and sovereign silence. Chapter 8. Constructive Interference and Invisible Strings. In the majestic and often painful process of awakening within the neon cavern, the seeker who has begun to purify their crystal faces one of the most severe and desolate vibrational tests of the hologram, the mirage of eternal isolation. As the sleepwalker transmutes, cleaning their lenses of false refraction, an inevitable phenomenon occurs. The strident music of the ordinary world, that cacophony of banal urgencies, gossip, complaints, and desperate desires that once seemed normal, begins to be unbearably dissonant. His inner ear has been tuned, and the noise of the mob becomes an assault on his newly discovered peace. By raising his frequency, he ceases to resonate. He can no longer participate in empty conversations without feeling his vital energy drain. He can no longer laugh at tragedies disguised as entertainment. As a result, he withdraws. He takes a step back into stillness. It is precisely here that the neon cavern launches its most astute counterattack, the illusion of bitter exile. The ego, still holding memories of the herd instinct, panics at being surrounded by silence. It whispers a cold lie. It convinces the seeker that the price of enlightenment is perpetual solitude. It makes him believe that by tuning his instrument to a higher octave, he has condemned himself to play in an empty concert hall. The seeker looks around, sees the sleepwalkers grouped together, sharing their dense heat, and feels a pang of nostalgia. He feels the cold of outer space. Under this illusion, the seeker in transition faces two deadly traps. The first trap is regression by suffocation. Terrified by isolation, the individual betrays his light. He deliberately lowers his frequency and detunes his tuning fork to fit back into the choir of sleepwalkers. He puts the asphalt armor back on and becomes opaque so as not to discomfort those in the shadows. He vibrates in the altar of belonging, ignoring that once the eye has seen the full spectrum, black and white is suicide. The second trap is the resentful hermit. The seeker accepts solitude, but does so from arrogance and bitterness. He builds a pedestal of spiritual superiority. He looks at humanity with contempt, considering himself a martyr of consciousness. This attitude is simply the same background noise of the ego on a different frequency. Resentment is a dense vibration. Whoever isolates themselves out of contempt is not emitting pure light, but a shadow of wounded pride. Both traps are born from the same optical blindness, the belief that the universe is sterile and the network of consciousness is broken. the seeker assumes he is disconnected from reality. He ignores that the holographic universe is an infinite loom of vibrating strings. Initial isolation is not a punishment, but the anechoic chamber needed to clean his signal before the cosmos can orchestrate the most powerful, explosive, and miraculous encounter of wave physics. Isolation is the prelude to a higher union. The dynamics, wave optics, and constructive interference. To dismantle the blasphemy of bitter solitude and awaken to the supreme connection of the luminary, we must dive into the mathematical beauty of wave theory. We must understand how light and sound interact in space and discover the phenomenon that makes two awakened consciousnesses infinitely more powerful. Superposition. Imagine you are at the edge of a perfectly still pond. If you drop a stone, concentric waves begin to travel across the surface. Each wave has crests, highest points, and valleys, lowest points. This is the nature of every emanation in the universe, whether light, sound, or the frequency of your thoughts and emotions. Now, what happens when two distinct waves meet in the same space and time? In classical physics, if two solid objects collide, they repel or destroy each other. But waves are not solid matter. They are energy in motion. When two waves cross, they experience the principle of superposition. Their amplitudes add up. The result of this sum depends entirely on the geometric phase they are in. This is where optics reveals the secret of human relationships. First, there is destructive interference. Suppose you emit a wave of light, your purpose, your love, and it meets another person's wave, but their wave is out of phase. When your wave is at its highest point, a crest of enthusiasm, the other person's wave is at its lowest point, a valley of fear or apathy. Upon colliding, the valley cancels the crest. The mathematics is relentless. Pun $1 added to B $1 equals $0. The result of destructive interference is a flat line, a zone of darkness, a cancellation of energy. This is why certain people leave you exhausted without any physical effort. When you try to maintain links with sleepwalkers vibrating in fear, you subject your luminous field to constant destructive interference. Your light fails to propagate because it is being cancelled. No matter how bright you shine, if your partner or environment is out of phase with you, your glow will go out at the point of contact. That is why the neon cavern is so dark. It is full of millions of contradictory waves crashing and cancelling each other. But the cosmos offers a counterpart of overwhelming beauty. There is constructive interference. What happens when you emit your wave of light and it meets in space with another wave, possessing exactly the same frequency, the same length, and that is in perfect phase with you? When your crest meets their crest and your valley meets their valley, in this case they merge. The sum of their amplitudes is not a simple arithmetic addition. It is a geometric multiplication of power. If two waves of light in perfect phase overlap, the resulting flash is not twice as bright. It is a colossal radiance that alters the metric of space. Two identical sound waves can shake matter's foundations. Constructive interference is the law governing awakened consciousnesses. When two minds that have purified their crystal meet in the 3D hologram, they do not add their forces, they multiply them exponentially. Here intervenes the mystery of the invisible strings. Empty space is not a dead distance. It is a unified field, a vibrating matrix connecting every atom. As in sympathetic resonance, if you tension the string of your soul in a specific note and make it vibrate with enough purity, that vibration will travel through the holographic web. Any other string tuned to that same note will begin to vibrate in response. The seeker's isolation is a temporary optical illusion. You are not alone. You are simply in the calibration phase of your instrument, preparing to emit a tone so pure it will force the invisible strings of the hologram to tighten and attract the rare, invaluable, and all-powerful mirrors of light meant for you. The synthesis, the magnet of the higher octave and the choir of luminaries. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary in the realm of human connections marks the end of the social hunt and the birth of magnetism by tuning. The Awakened Prism understands that going out to search for friends or partners is a vibrational miscalculation. Active searching implies you leave your center. It implies you leave your resonance chamber to enter the mob's noise, hoping to find a flash of light. The luminary repudiates pursuit, because to pursue is to emit the frequency of scarcity. The synthesis of this chapter is materialized in the radical adoption of static emanation. The luminary does not go to the world. The luminary stays in his center, turns his photoluminescence to maximum power, and lets the lighthouse of his truth cross the distances. He knows that constructive interference cannot be forced. You cannot shake a sleepwalker until they reach your frequency. If you try, you generate friction, wear, and disappointment. Tuning is an intimate and non-transferable process. Therefore, the luminary's posture toward solitude is one of icy and serene majesty. He assumes silence as his canvas. If his current environment does not resonate with his new ambitions or his incorruptible peace, the luminary does not argue, he does not preach. He does not try to convince the shadows to become light. He simply emits his note. He becomes transparent to the criticism of those who do not understand him, the crystal armor, and maintains his higher octave without apology. He understands that by holding this note, he subjects his reality to unbearable tension. Everything false suffers under this tension. As a result of holding the note, a natural purge occurs. People operating in destructive interference, energy vampires, addicts to chaos, chronic enviers, begin to feel deeply uncomfortable in the presence of the luminary. His pure light is blinding to them. The silence of the awakened prism exposes the deafening noise of their own minds. Without the luminary having to kick anyone out, discordant consciousnesses move away on their own, repelled by the lack of resonance. And it is in the vacuum they leave, in that newly liberated space where wave magic happens. By having purged the channel, the luminary signal travels through the invisible strings of the holographic field without obstruction. It reaches corners of the 3D ecosystem that were previously inaccessible. And there, other consciousnesses that have done the same work of purification receive the signal. The universe, which is a perfect machinery of pattern synchronization, begins to orchestrate the crossings of destiny. These are not casual meetings, they are cosmic collisions predestined by the mathematics of light. Recognition is almost instantaneous. There is no need for the clumsy dances of superficial courtesy. There is no need to wear asphalt masks or impress with hollow credentials. Crystals recognize each other in mutual transparency. The quality of these alliances is unfathomable for the inhabitant of the neon cavern. In sleepwalking society, relationships are based on parasitism. I give you light to cover your wounds. These are deals of beggars exchanging counterfeit coins in the dark. But when two or more luminaries unite, an alliance is forged based on overabundance. Neither needs the other's light to exist, for both are autonomous stars. They unite for the aesthetic ecstasy of constructive interference. By sharing a project, a business, or a life, their identical frequencies overlap. Their crests align with their crests. The result is a vibrational choir of such power that the entire hologram bends to their will. A group of awakened minds is a composite laser capable of rewriting the rules of an industry. They do not lose energy in egos or absurd competitions because they know the other's brightness does not turn off theirs, but multiplies it to infinity. To master the language of invisible strings, you must commit the most absolute act of faith. You must stop fearing silence. If the price is an empty table, pay it. Embrace temporary exile. Do not compromise the purity of your signal by lowering the volume to accommodate ears that refuse to hear. Keep your tuning fork vibrating in the octave of mastery and crystalline light. Trust in the relentless physics of waves. Trust that the universe will not let such a note be lost. Hold the frequency, breathe in the gloom, and wait. Because in the immensity of the hologram, there are minds tuning their own instruments at this precise instant, preparing for the harmonic clash that will multiply your light by 1,000,000. Exile is not your destination. It is the silent room where the symphony begins. Chapter 9, Fluorescence in the Abyss. In the vast and complex ecosystem of the neon cavern, human consciousness has been domesticated under an aesthetic tyranny that dictates the exact conditions in which it is acceptable to exist. The sleepwalker has been instilled with an irreversible addiction to the comfort of the visible spectrum. He is a slave to the midday light. He has been taught that life only has value, meaning, and direction when it is bathed in the warm, predictable, and revealing light of noon. He has built his identity, his routines, and his fragile sense of security, assuming that the sun of his external circumstances, his financial stability or his health, will never cease to shine. We shall call this pathological dependence on external clarity, this primitive terror of the disappearance of known forms, the illusion of the collapse of vision. I understand the nature of this panic, as it is encoded in the very biology of perception. When the human eye loses its source of exterior illumination, it seeks a photon. The human pupil dilates desperately, seeking a photon to cling to. Three-dimensional darkness disorients the brain, erases the limits of the body, and dissolves the borders between the observer and the void. For the inhabitant of the cavern, darkness is not an optical phenomenon. It is synonymous with death. It is the end of the world. Therefore, observe the vibrational X-ray of his agony when life, in its incessant dance of frequencies, decrees the inevitable descent of the night. When a devastating crisis assails his hologram, the sudden loss of his empire, the end of a love he considered eternal, or a diagnosis, the neon reflectors fuse in a burst. The sleepwalker is thrown, without warning, into the depths of an abyss where not a single ray of visible light penetrates. His immediate reaction is absolute paralysis. The ordinary individual, unable to see the path before him, assumes with tragic ingenuity that the path has ceased to exist. He falls to his knees in blackness. He is convinced that if he cannot perceive the colors of his success or the contours of his previous joy, his life has ended. In the darkness, the sleepwalker feels that his own being disintegrates. Since he has spent his existence defining himself through the light others projected onto him, he disappears when it is off. In a desperate attempt not to face the void, the sleepwalker resorts to lighting miserable matches. He seeks artificial lights of very short duration and low purity, banal distractions, anesthetic addictions, endless complaints seeking the compassion of others or the toxic comfort of other sleepwalkers crying in the dark. He fears the gloom so much that he prefers to burn his hands with the ephemeral flame of a cheap illusion rather than allow his eyes to adapt to the mystery of the night. The pain of this stage is heartbreaking because it is based on a false perceptive premise. He believes that in total darkness there is no way to advance. The sleepwalker believes that in the abyss there is no way to create and no way to emit. He has confused the absence of light in the visible spectrum with the total absence of energy. He ignores, with an optical ignorance that condemns him to chronic suffering, that the blackness of the abyss is not empty. He is blind to it. The darkness of great existential crises is saturated, dense, and suffocatingly full of a frequency of light that his ordinary eyes are unable to process. While he continues crying for the loss of noon, he will never discover that the night is the only stage designed by the cosmos to reveal the most magical and secret colors. He will never see the indestructible colors that inhabit the vault of his own soul, the dynamics, the invisible radiation, and the alchemy of minerals. To dismantle the blasphemy of paralysis and awaken to the resplendent majesty of the luminary in times of ruin, we must abandon the surface of the visible spectrum and dive into the deep mystery of high-energy optics and atomic resonance. We must understand a phenomenon that defies the logic of ordinary matter, ultraviolet. We must understand the existence of ultraviolet radiation and the miracle of fluorescence. In the physics of electromagnetic waves, the light that your biological eyes can see, the reds, yellows, greens, and blues that make up your daily reality, occupies a ridiculously small strip of the total spectrum. It is a safe band. But just beyond the color violet, at the very limit where human vision fails and the screen turns black, the domain of ultraviolet radiation begins. Ultraviolet light is invisible to you. If you entered a room illuminated exclusively by short-wave ultraviolet lamps, your eyes would tell you that you are in total darkness. However, this invisible light is infinitely more powerful, more energetic, and more penetrating than any midday sunbeam. It carries a frequency so high that it can alter the atomic structure of the things it touches. And here is where the earth offers us one of the most beautiful spiritual metaphors of creation: minerals. In geology, there are certain minerals, such as fluorite, willemite, or calcite, that when exposed to ordinary sunlight seem like common grey-brown rocks lacking any aesthetic appeal. A passerby would ignore them completely, considering them stones without value. But the magic of these minerals is hidden in plain sight. If you take that grey rock, carry it to the depths of an underground cave, turn off absolutely all sources of visible light until you are immersed in a black abyss, and then turn on an ultraviolet lamp, the miracle occurs. The grey rock, wrapped in that darkness charged with invisible energy, begins to devour radiation. Its electrons absorb the high ultraviolet frequency, process it in their atomic guts, and, in an act of optical alchemy, return the energy to space in the form of visible light. The ordinary rock suddenly explodes in vivid, electric, and impossible colors: neon greens, vibrant pinks, celestial blues, and burning oranges. In the middle of the most terrifying abyss, the stone shines with its own intense and hypnotic light. This phenomenon is known as fluorescence. The mineral did not produce those magical colors under daylight, because the comfort of the visible spectrum washed out its true potential. Its beauty required radiation. Its most intimate beauty demanded the presence of extreme radiation and the total absence of ordinary light to manifest. This quantum and optical mechanic is the exact replica of the anatomy of your spirit when you face the great holographic crises. Tragedy and failure are not black holes of nothingness. Tragedy, failure, and ruin are massive discharges of spiritual ultraviolet radiation. They are waves of extremely high frequency, saturated with a colossal transforming energy. The problem is that the human ego, unable to see the ordinary light of happiness or financial security, assumes it is in absolute darkness. The sleepwalker is like a common stone, like granite or slate. When the ultraviolet radiation of crisis hits him in the middle of the darkness of his life, he simply absorbs the blow and remains dark, cold, and dead. He becomes depressed, victimized, and surrenders. His structure cannot transmute that energy into light. But the cosmos teaches us, through fluorescence, that extreme darkness is not the end of vision. It is the revelation canvas of the higher octaves. The theorem of fluorescence decrees that the most sublime, powerful, and incorruptible attributes of a consciousness, invincible courage and pure creativity, only ignite then. They can only be seen and appreciated when all sources of external comfort have been disconnected, and the soul is subjected to the invisible pressure of the abyss. The synthesis, the ultraviolet revelation, and the song in the darkness. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary marks the end of panic before the gloom and the birth of sovereignty in the abyss. For the awakened prism, the arrival of the dark night of the soul is not a condemnation to be suffered with clenched teeth. It is the supreme stage. It is the moment of your true glory. The luminary repudiates the cowardice of those who only know how to shine when the weather favors them. He understands that true mastery is not demonstrated by walking through a lit garden. It is demonstrated by radiating neon light at the bottom of the ocean. The synthesis of this chapter is alchemical fluorescence. How is this optical wonder executed in the theater of human suffering? It manifests through the art of frequency synthesis under pressure. When the life of the luminary collapses, when the holographic structure of his company crumbles, or his reputation is dragged through the mud, the visible light goes out. The cold of uncertainty floods the room. And in that dizzying silence, unlike the sleepwalker crying over his extinguished matches, the luminary closes his eyes, breathes deeply, and smiles in the dark. He immediately recognizes the ultraviolet radiation. He feels the immense amount of energy the universe throws. He feels the destructive and chaotic energy the universe is throwing at him. And instead of resisting, he opens the floodgates of his own crystal and allows that painful energy to flood his system. Here is where the awakened prism proves his consciousness is a master instrument. He needs no external light to see. In absolute darkness, he does not need to see the keyboard of three-dimensional reality. His spiritual hands recognize the exact topography of his own harmonics by pure intuition. Like a master of acoustic synthesis, the Luminary takes the raw, painful wave of crisis and passes it through his internal filters. He passes it through the filters of his own wisdom, detachment, and icy discipline. By processing the invisible radiation of tragedy, the electrons of his consciousness are excited. His spirit takes a quantum leap toward a higher octave, and then, in the middle of the world's weeping, the Luminary emits light. He begins to shine with a fluorescent intensity. From the ashes of his financial ruin, he synthesizes a business model so revolutionary and pure that the entire industry is blinded by his radiance. From the depths of a betrayed heart, he emits a frequency of unconditional love so electric that it heals everyone. From the paralysis of deep depression, he extracts a work of art, a book, or a melody of such heartbreaking and luminous beauty that it pierces the asphalt armor of sleepwalkers. Observe the colossal invulnerability of this vibrational state. The world cannot threaten a Luminary by taking his possessions away. The world cannot threaten him with loss of status or comfort, because the Luminary knows that by taking away the visible light, the world is only doing him an immense favor. It is providing the black background necessary for his true colors to explode in space. The enemy who tries to throw you into a pit fails. The enemy trying to destroy you in the dark, ignoring your photoluminescent nature, makes the most humiliating tactical error. By turning off your light, he has only managed to ignite you. He has created the perfect contrast for your consecration. Ordinary brilliance is cheap. Anyone can smile when the bank is full. Anyone can show themselves strong when health is perfect. Midday light is the domain of grey rocks that disguise themselves as precious stones thanks to the sun's reflection. But the light of comfort is deceptive. Fluorescence in the abyss is the unnegotiable signature of spiritual royalty. You are the source. When you walk through the mire of your own disasters, and instead of blending with the mud, you radiate a clarity that defies all laws of emotional thermodynamics, the entire universe stops to watch. The neon cavern falls silent, for before a consciousness that converts pain into light, the illusion of fear dissolves. To forge this fluorescent mechanism in your internal architecture, you must declare the end of your enmity with crisis today. You must extirpate the belief that dark stages are divine punishments or errors in the matrix. They are ultraviolet fuel refills. They are the energy needed for your next evolution. When the next wave of darkness hits your hologram and you feel everything you knew vanishing into the blackness, do not despair trying to light the old light. Do not try to go back. Sit in the center of your own ruin. Absorb the high frequency of pain without resisting. Feel how radiation excites your spirit. Feel the molecules of your spirit preparing for the leap. Tune your oscillators in the blackness, adjust the filters of your consciousness, and prepare to execute the most sublime transmutation of the art of living. You are no longer a victim of the dark. You are the reason the dark has finally become interesting. When you learn not to fear the loss of external light and discover that you are capable of generating impossible colors from the vacuum itself, you will have defeated psychological death. You will have ceased to be a fearful spectator, to become the supreme prism, the optical alchemist capable of lighting galaxies. You are the one who lights the most dead galaxies with the incandescent, radioactive, and immortal magic of your own indomitable presence. Chapter 10. The Invisible Spectrum and the Higher Octaves. In the most superficial and noisy galleries of the neon cavern, a sensory tyranny prevails. It is so absolute and silencing that the vast majority of the human species is born, ages, and dies without ever suspecting the immensity of the landscape that surrounds them. The sleepwalker has been domesticated under the most primitive dogma. He is under the dictatorship of the evident. He has been indoctrinated in the iron belief that reality is circumscribed solely and exclusively to the narrow strip of information that his 5 basic senses can capture. He is taught that if his eyes cannot see it, it simply does not exist. This is the prison of the evident. Observe the perceptive X-ray of this captivity. The ordinary individual walks through the 3D hologram like a prisoner confined in a windowless room, convinced that the entire universe ends at the 4 painted walls of his cell. His mind operates exclusively in the vibrational band of survival, consumerism, and immediate drama. When the sleepwalker interacts with the world, he is only capable of processing the surface of events. In a conversation, he hears only the literal meaning of words, being completely deaf to the emotional frequency, the hidden fear, or the manipulative intention that travels in the silence between the syllables. If he contemplates a social conflict or an economic crisis, he observes only the physical movements of the masses and the numbers printed on screens. He is absolutely blind to the immense currents of collective energy and the octaves of influence that are actually pulling the strings of the three-dimensional puppet. This dependence on the visible condemns him to an existence of perpetual reactivity and chronic clumsiness. The sleepwalker lives tripping over the furniture of the universe because he always arrives late to reality. By perceiving only the matter already crystallized, he ignores that any physical event is but a link. It is the last and densest link in a long chain of invisible causes. When the sleepwalker sees the lightning, the thunder has already deafened him. When he sees the materialized betrayal, the vibrational disloyalty had already been brewing for months in the air he breathed, but he did not know how to smell it. The tragedy of the neon cavern is that it is designed to saturate that small visible strip with so much noise and so many flashes of strident colors that the individual never feels the curiosity to look beyond the screen. The system keeps him hypnotized with the illusion of material urgency and short-term drama. It tells him, look at this news, look at this product, look at this drama, forcing his consciousness to focus like a laser beam on the surface of the hologram. And while the sleepwalker keeps his biological eyes wide open, the eye of his intuition and his satellite dish for subtle frequencies atrophy into dead organs. Whoever limits his understanding of the cosmos to what the average human eye can see is like a man who enters a library containing all the knowledge of the universe, but who, not knowing how to read the letters, concludes that the books are simply rectangular blocks of paper without any value. He is a pawn. As long as the human being continues to worship the idol of the tangible, he will remain a manipulable pawn on the chessboard, moved by forces he cannot see and governed by entities and consciousnesses that have learned to operate in the overwhelming silence of the invisible spectrum. The dynamics, the immensity of the spectrum and the architecture of harmonics. To dismantle the blasphemy of literality and awaken to the perceptive omniscience of the luminary, we must abandon the cage of the biological senses and dive into the abstract majesty of wave physics and musical synthesis. We must understand the insignificance of the visible spectrum and the higher octaves. In the science of optics, the electromagnetic spectrum is the complete map of all light and radiation that exists in the universe. It includes radio waves that are kilometers long, microwaves, infrared radiation, the light we see, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays and gamma rays. These are fundamental to reality. Of all this unfathomable, infinite and all-powerful immensity, the light that the human eye is biologically equipped to perceive represents a fraction so infinitesimally small that it is mathematically absurd. It is barely a tiny slit in a wall that extends across entire continents. It is a sensory blindfold. Everything you love, everything you fear, and all the faces you have touched exist packaged within that tiny slit. Everything else around you, the immense magnetic storms of the sun, the radiation of the Big Bang, and the subtle frequencies of mental intention, is absolute and completely invisible to you. The universe is a boiling ocean of invisible energies, and the ordinary human being is a diver who explores the Mariana Trench, looking through the eye of a needle, believing with a pathetic pride that what he sees through that hole is all there is in the sea. But optics is not the only revealing discipline. Acoustics and string theory offer us the concept of octaves and harmonics. Imagine an infinite piano. When the sleepwalker lives his life, he does so by repeatedly hitting 3 or 4 keys in the center of the keyboard. These central keys represent the dense and visible emotions, anger, fear, and lust. However, in music, when you strike a key, not only does that note sound the fundamental frequency, the vibration of the string causes the air to resonate in exact multiples of that frequency, creating harmonics that extend upwards into higher octaves that the ordinary ear can barely register. The holographic universe is not composed of simple notes, it is a symphony of harmonics. Every thought you emit has a fundamental frequency that crystallizes in matter, but it also possesses resonances in higher and lower octaves that interact with the invisible fabric of space and time. The neon cavern operates in the lowest octaves. It is a world dominated by spiritual infrared, slow, dense, and hot frequencies associated with friction, war, biological pain, and tribal fear. The sleepwalker lives immersed in this vibrational mud, deaf to the music of the spheres and the subtle. But beyond the noise of the crowd, in the higher octaves of the spectrum, the ultraviolet of consciousness, frequencies become dizzyingly fast, short, and of a colossal energy. In these octaves, information does not need words to be transmitted. Distances do not exist, and linear time dissolves. The reality you experience in your material plane is simply the projected shadow, the final and hardened precipitation of the invisible symphonies being played in the higher octaves of your consciousness. To try to change your life by modifying only what you see is as useless as hitting a radio speaker. The theorem of deep perception decrees that absolute dominion over the material hologram belongs to the consciousness that has managed to dilate its spiritual pupil to embrace the invisible spectrum. He who tunes his internal tuning fork with the higher octaves acquires the power to alter the source code. The synthesis, the intuitive eye and harmonic ascension. The transmutation from sleepwalker to luminary marks the instant of definitive sensory expansion. It is the dizzying, silent, and all-powerful moment in which the awakened prism closes the eyes of the flesh and opens the immaculate eye of deep perception. The luminary abandons the vulgarity of the evident. He refuses to be deceived by the surface of mirrors and assumes his legitimate right to read the invisible scores of the universe. He assimilates harmonic ascension. The synthesis of this supreme power does not require muscular effort. It requires a radical tuning of receptivity to the subtle. How is this mastery executed in the theater of the daily world? The luminary becomes a frequency reader. He begins to interact with reality not through the meaning of events, but through their vibrational signature. He stops paying primary attention to the words that come out of people's mouths. Words are visible light. They are easy to fake, easy to disguise with makeup. The awakened prism listens to the silence between the words. He calibrates his internal antenna to capture the infrared or ultraviolet radiation emanating from the emotional body of the other. He senses the underlying truth. If a sleepwalker smiles and offers a wonderful deal, the ordinary ego would leap for joy. But the luminary perceives a subtle dissonance. He feels a low harmonic, a dense frequency of desperation or greed hidden under the surface of the hologram. Without need for proof, the luminary declines the deal. His intuition, his connection with the higher octaves, has shown him the poison before the cup touched his lips. This ability to read the invisible spectrum grants the luminary a tactical and spiritual advantage that borders on precognition. He identifies the storms before the clouds form in the physical sky. When he perceives that the environment of an industry or a relationship has begun to vibrate in the heavy octaves of chaos and friction, he does not wait for the building to collapse to flee. He simply alters his own frequency, changes his oscillation, and shifts towards a lateral reality in the field. But the mastery of the higher octaves does not consist only of dodging the blows of the universe. It consists of the divine capacity to emit in those frequencies, to orchestrate pure creation. The sleepwalker tries to create success, working 18 hours a day in the physical world, pushing objects. The luminary assumes a posture of frozen and amorphic creation. He withdraws to his chamber of silence and raises his own frequency toward the ultraviolet of consciousness. In this state of high energy, devoid of fear and doubt, the luminary conceives his purpose with crystalline and absolute clarity. He generates a thought form of such crystalline purity and imbues it with an emotion so high that the frequency he emits cuts through the static of the world like a scalpel of coherent light. In the science of cymatics, as you increase frequency, the patterns formed in the sand become more complex. In the same way, when the luminary operates in the higher octaves, the sand of the 3D world, capital, key people, resources, begins to magically reorganize around his vision, creating geometries of success and beauty that sleepwalkers consider inexplicable miracles. He simply raised the tone of his song. By mastering this harmonic ascension, the fear of death, loss, and 3D pain disintegrates. The Luminary understands that the physical body and stone empires are simply low notes in an infinite song. If a physical instrument breaks, the melody does not die. It simply moves to a higher harmonic dimension. To inhabit this state of peaceful omniscience, you must declare war on your own voluntary blindness. Stop taking the literal world so seriously. The alarmist news on TV, the insult of an enemy, or the fall of your finances are simple mirages of light refracted in the narrowest band of the spectrum. Close your eyes. Stop your ears to literality. Begin to trust blindly in the hunch, in the fleeting intuition, in that electric heartbeat that runs down your spine when you are before an inescapable truth or an invisible danger. Train your mind to look for the energy signature behind every single human face. Demand of yourself to leave the survival strip. If your daily thoughts only revolve around what you will eat and how you will pay debts, you are playing the piano of your soul on the most rusted and grave keys of the far left. You are emitting a symphony of mud. You are trapping yourself in the low. Shift your hands to the right side of the keyboard. Tune in to frozen compassion, to the masterful design of your purpose, and to the absolute certainty that you are an electromagnetic field capable of tearing the veil of material reality. When you learn to read the invisible currents, you find true peace. When your inner voice is capable of singing in the higher octaves, where ultraviolet light dances with cosmic rays, the illusion of difficulty will evaporate. You will cease to be the puppet struggling against the strings, to transmute into the full spectrum, into the immensity of the consciousness. You will become the consciousness that moves the hands of the puppeteer in the most sacred, luminous, and absolute silence of existence. Conclusion: the primordial emanation. The journey through the neon cavern culminates not with a roar, but with an absolute and crystalline silence. For eons, humanity has lived under the agonizing spell of separation. The sleepwalker suffers because he conceives of his existence as an isolated spark, thrown into a dark, cold, and hostile universe, forced to fight. He is forced to fight for every photon of heat and every flash of meaning. His entire life is a tragic hunt. He pursues success, begs for love, and accumulates dense matter, believing that light is a treasure that must be captured from the outside and jealously kept under lock and key. He is a prisoner of his own perceived lack. But you have cleaned your prism. You have pierced through the holographic mirage of matter. You have killed the lunar reflection of dependency, and you have embraced the necessary density of your own shadow. By tuning your consciousness to the higher octaves and the invisible spectrum, the final veil of the optical illusion disintegrates. You discover the most terrifying and sublime truth of the cosmos. The search for light was, in itself, the last trap of the distorted crystal. You cannot find the light because you are the original source. You are the very thing you were looking for in the darkness of the world. The search has ended where it began. In this culminating state, the awakened prism reaches what in vibrational alchemy is known as the primordial emanation. It is the definitive collapse of all duality. There is no longer a frightened observer trying to understand the universe, nor an entity trying to refract an external beam to light his path. The division is gone. When the frequency of your consciousness is purified to match the exact octave of creation, the illusory border between you and the fabric of reality disappears completely. You are simultaneously the wave and the cosmic ocean that propagates it. You are the projector, the light, and the entire scene being displayed. The primordial emanation is a state of radiant peace where effort dies naturally. The luminary no longer tries to alter the three-dimensional hologram by pushing shadows with his hands, because he has assimilated that external reality is simply the acoustic echo of his own center. The reflection follows the source. If the center vibrates in perfect harmony, the 3D hologram has no optical alternative but to reorganize into patterns of immense beauty, abundance, and unshakable synchronicity. You walk through the world without the need to defend your ego, without the anxiety of hiding your cracks, and without the urgency to convince others. Your mere presence, vibrating in the frequency of unconditional purity, raises the fundamental note of every room you enter and of every consciousness you touch. You have remembered the forgotten language of light. You no longer need to spell out the syllables of material success or beg for a reflection in the gloom. You have become the direct transmission. Rest in this luminous silence. Let the sleepwalkers continue running to exhaustion after neon lighthouses that fade with the storm. You have ignited the stellar core that knows no eclipse, returning to the original state where there are no distances to cross and no shadows to fear. There are no mirages to defeat. There only exists the infinite, eternal, and all-powerful expansion of your own, glorious and inextinguishable essence. The journey is over, and you are finally home.